All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the messaging workshop, Why Creative Risk Takers Win. We're going to pause for just a moment here. And if everyone would please tell us in the chat, what is a campaign or a brand that you have a crush on? What is something you have seen recently where you thought, wow, that's really clever or creative? And so with that, let's get into it. So whatever you thought of, whatever you posted, the question we would pose is, did you like it because it is the same as everything you tend to see out there or because it is different? It ends up you're probably a pretty good proxy for B2B buyers. Like they enter buying cycles, we know from a lot of research, including from Sixth Sense, with a lot of fixed ideas. They come in with a list of 4 vendors. They already have that list ranked and they tend to buy from the first one that they contact. Jessica, anything you would add to this idea?
Yeah, I mean, what it really means is that marketers need to make sure that they're grabbing the attention of your prospect. It's not sales' job anymore. It's definitely solidly in marketing's hands. And so you've got to have something special that is going to get your prospect to pay attention and listen to you.
So given that, it's sort of shocking how much, in my mind, I see everything starting to converge on sameness. We're actually seeing this in a lot of places in society, but you can see here by the color of cars over time, things are turning white and gray and colorless. You see this with logos. For some reason, there's a trend about having everyone's logo becoming the same blocky lockup, which in a squint test, if you squint, they become increasingly difficult to tell apart. And we're seeing this all across society. If you look at colors generally all throughout, everything seems to be converging again on this sort of beige color. That becomes a problem in marketing when your message gets thrown up alongside everyone else's messages and it's hard to tell them apart. So we'll pose the question here. Can anyone tell who these messages belong to? And these are all companies all of you know of. And that's the great challenge is this is increasingly what is happening is we don't get to control the channel as much anymore. People are not going to your website to do that initial research. They are doing it in an LLM, which disintermediates all of the brand and the design into a text. And if your text looks like this next to everyone else's text, it's pretty hard to stand out and be memorable and build trust. Similarly, we're seeing this with logos or the monogram logo symbols before everyone's logo. Like for some reason, all the AI ones look the same. We've got a lot of A's in the marketing software world. And so we're going to explore that in today's webinar. And we'll start off by introducing ourselves. Jessica, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jessica Fulis. I'm the head of marketing at Inverta, B2B growth marketing agency. I have been in the B2B space for almost 30 years at this point, a lot of tech in my background. And one thing that has me interested in having this conversation today is that back in 2000 was my first job in tech. And I worked for a company called Latitude Communications. I'm guessing nobody on this call knows who Latitude Communications is. We were one of the very first voice and web conferencing solutions. Who came up at the exact same time was WebEx, which I'm guessing is a name that everybody recognizes. And it was because they were different. We were kind of your standard we were a corporate tool. We just, played by corporate rules. And in comes WebEx, RuPaul, pitching their stuff. And now, was RuPaul controversial? Absolutely, because not everybody in the world was into alternative lifestyles. And it was like, wait, what is this? Oh, we're gonna offend the Midwest, right? We're gonna offend the South. And WebEx didn't care. And you know what? They won, regardless of who they may or may not have offended, because they stood out and everybody knew who WebEx was. Was their product any better than ours? No, but they won out long term because they stood out in the marketplace. And so that's my vested interest in having this conversation today with Chris, is to get more people to think about standing out and taking some risks to give your brand that advantage.
Yeah, we wanna be interested. I think that's, that's a great, it's a great point. Like, this can be interesting. We should be interested in the work that we're doing. We should be interested in each other's work, and that should definitely come through. My part of this is I'm CEO and co-founder of Fenwick. I started my career at Marketo and started as a salesperson on calls with marketers whose top objection was, "We don't have enough content." And I always thought that was just such a strange term, as if content was something you went to a warehouse and pulled out of a bin and put in a shopping cart. And my feeling and question always was like, "But who are you? What is it you are trying to say? What is true about you that you want to communicate?" And I feel like a lot of that doesn't get explored in the B2B space, and it is not because B2B is inherently boring. I hear that B2B isn't sexy line over and over, and everything is interesting to someone who is an expert at it. And our audiences are experts, and they want us to feel as interested in the stories that we are telling, I believe, as we want to be. And so my interest here is giving those who are watching some tools with which to fight the fight internally to be differentiated, because you may be entering this with all of the same beliefs as us, but how do you activate it when you're in a large structure and there's a lot of internal selling that has to happen to get others to believe that taking a creative risk is actually a good idea? And so with that, where were we? Fitting in is really bad for business. Jessica, you talk about this all the time, but like, what is a marketer's primary job? It's to build trust.
Mhm. And if nobody sees your content, you can't build trust with them,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Like, you need to get noticed. So it's like, be on the list and be memorable so that they know you're on the list.
Exactly.
Standing out is really, really good. This won a Cannes award this year. It's a B2B campaign, right? GoDaddy sells websites, and it's just strange and irreverent, right? Like, nobody's data analysis would have led them to think that a pun about using an actor whose name is Walter Goggins launching a goggle brand so that they can play around with Walter Goggins goggle glasses would have been a good idea, and it's super, super silly, and it's well acted, and it's well produced, and they really did have him launch these, and I see people walking around San Francisco wearing them, and this isn't a product that existed prior. It wasn't a real ambition of his. It was a creative campaign. It was a bunch of people sitting around in a room making each other laugh, and then it got out, and it worked, and it's really, really helped their brand. This is not easy to do, right? This was done by an outside creative studio. So, Jessica, I'd love to hear from you, like, typical creative process to get to something like this that is actually going to stand out and be different and unique and take a risk. Like, what is it that you see process wise in large B2B marketing organizations that prevents this kind of creativity from maybe making it out into the world?
Brand guidelines. Those are the downfall, of every creative concept on the planet, right? The bigger the company, the more strictly people have to adhere to brand guidelines, and you must use these colors, and you must have this tone of voice, and blah blah blah. And when you have a creative team or you have a campaigns team internal to your organization, they feel handcuffed to those brand guidelines and they cannot diverge from that. And so that just is a creativity killer. And so when it gets to quote unquote creative, it is creative within the box of your brand guidelines, which means it's not creative at all. Right. And so, this typical process here is, the company has, its goals and objectives for the year, and then the CMO has to match what they're going to do to that. And once again, it's just numbers, right? And then we're like, how many campaigns do we need to do to achieve the goals that the company needs from us? Numbers,
Yeah.
right? Okay, how are we going to staff it? How are we going to budget it? Once again, numbers. And now we go, great. Okay, we have a campaign that we've decided is going to be on this topic and it needs to drive this many pipeline opportunities. Go be creative. No, no, right? No, nobody's gonna be creative at that point because so much of the room for that has been stripped out at this point that it's like, great, okay, well, we need to drive, 100 pipeline opportunities and we're gonna do what we typically do. And we're gonna use all the same channels we always do. And we're gonna use the blue and orange and white that is in our color palette, and we're going to write a white paper and we're going to put it out through email and on LinkedIn ads and display advertising and hope for the best.
Yep.
That's what happens in your typical campaign workflow.
Yeah. It makes me think of the old joke about the pirate morale issue. They say the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
so much pressure misapplied with a lack of understanding of how do those creative things actually come together. I
right.
think of a very large Fortune 10 enterprise that we have worked together on recently where we came in and the initial brief is so tightly constrained and they have waited until the very last minute to involve creatives and the least value that a creative director and their team can bring is moving words about on a page, right? It's
Mhm.
like there's so little you can achieve because the real substance and the meaning and the things that would get people outside to actually have a visceral reaction to this start way before. And Fenwick has a couple of principles, and one of them that I think is fairly controversial when we bring it into enterprise situations is no creative by committee. I think that machines produce what they are designed to produce. And a lot of companies don't realize that they actually have an anti creativity machine, that it is designed to your point, stick to the brand guidelines. And if this is all a silent movie and you ask, was that machine designed to produce, like tends to produce consensus at the cost of creativity. You have a lot of people who may not actually even understand the creative process, who are reviewing copy and reviewing ideas not from the understanding that we are trying to affect a feeling in our buyer, but they're thinking in their head, this doesn't sound how I would say it. And then you get 24 people throughout a process all saying, this doesn't quite sound how I would say it. And you wind up with something that is the most agreeable to everybody and absolutely generic and boring and uninteresting, right? Like
Well,
all edges have been sanded off of it by the
yeah,
end.
I mean, we're not here to talk about campaign planning process, but that is an inherent flaw in the way most organizations plan their campaigns because it's not clear who's responsible for what. I am self-admitted allergic to process. I absolutely am. I always have been. But, when you're thinking about the campaign planning process, creating a RACI or a structure that says who's responsible for what, who's accountable, who can have input, right? Versus who's just informed is so important because otherwise what happens is, and I had a client like this, and this was when they hit their breaking point when there was a trade show coming up and the campaign manager had a meeting to review the trade show landing page. And it wasn't even their trade show, it was their presence at that trade show. 20 people showed up to that meeting.
Yeah.
20. And they were like, absolutely not. We can't have this anymore.
Yeah.
And that is also part of what you're talking about, Chris. It's like there should not be 20 people on that call. There should be one. They may have gotten input along the way, but there
Yeah.
should be one person who ultimately decides what the copy is on that webpage.
That's exactly it. It's one creative owner so that there's a singular vision and they can incorporate everyone else's ideas, but ultimately they have to decide. Otherwise, it's not going to be coherent
Yep.
because, and again, like I joke about the machine, but it's like no one's stepping back to ask, what is this machine wired to produce? And if you were to rewire it from consensus to creativity, yeah, there'd be a lot less people involved. Like I think about some of the startups we work with where there is definitely no creative process already in place. And people are actually thrilled to be asked to stop reviewing things, right? We had one CEO who was proofreading everything we did, and we asked him to stop. And said, oh, thank God. That was exhausting. He's not necessary. Fewer people is going to produce something that is more directive and sometimes too, really useful to just get it out there too, right? I see this all the time that you have that group of 24 join Zoom, they all have their cameras off. And the question is, what do buyers really think? And no one has talked to a buyer in
Right.
too long. And you can resolve all of this by doing what we call a spark test, where you just send those creative concepts in a text to people that you know who are like those buyers or close enough and get a reaction. Be like, "Hey, I didn't create this," right? Because when you say you created it, they're not gonna be honest. You say, "I didn't make this. One of my teammates did this." Did anything here? And you get some really candid responses, and that little spark test can do so much more value then months of checking in with stakeholders and everyone cosplaying a customer.
Yep.
So what can you do specifically, right? We talked about a couple of things here. One of those things is to go offline. So I share these just as an example of if you were trying to build a system that achieved the kind of creativity that some of the best agencies achieve. Collins does some fantastic work and they have a requirement that you have to start offline. You cannot start on a computer with your research. You got to start out in the world. There's a amazing brand studio called So and So that did Fenwick's recent rebrand, and they start all of their logo work with pen and ink, and they require that. Ogilvy similarly has libraries in every office where you are encouraged to, instead of starting your campaign on the computer and going to Dribble and LinkedIn and places where everything is just a copy of a copy, and go back to source literature and architecture books and history. If you were to start to take some of that creative process and put it back in, you would look like this: much smaller committee, singular person deciding, and you would have those creatives at the very start. Because again, the question is, how do we put a campaign out of the world that people react to and love and have a really good time engaging with? And in my experience, the most helpful we can be is inserted early on to bring that customer perspective. We can be an advocate for the customer because the creatives on the team, and especially like an outside studio, are out there having these experiences, seeing things, noticing stuff that people inside the company may be just way too busy
Yeah.
to think about or engage with.
Well, and not only, um, and then not only is it, you know, a creative concept in and of itself, and it's going to be more engaging and those sorts of things, but everybody inside your organization gets pumped up about it when it's creative,
Yeah.
right? Instead of just like, oh, it's another standard day at the office, you know, posting my ads on LinkedIn and I'm, doing this and I'm doing that. People get excited and then it just snowballs, right? Because if the creative concept gets everybody fired up and gets everybody inspired, people are like, and we could, and we could, and we could, right? And so it just starts to explode. And sometimes you might have to rein that back in a little bit, but that's
Yeah.
okay. You'd rather have that than once again have everybody be uninspired and go, well, we'll just do what we always do.
Yep. Yep.
Because you're gonna get the same as you always get, sort of.
Exactly. So, Jessica, how did this start?
Yeah. Well, and so I think we modeled what you just showed on the last slide here, right? Because one of our corporate objectives, Inverta's been in business, for over a decade, and when we first came on the scene was with the rise of account-based marketing. So we were known, although not exclusively but we were known as one of the leaders in account-based marketing because we were first to market with the core principles and helping our clients actually succeed with it. Well, over time, a lot more players have come into the marketplace, right? So there's a lot more moneyness on who knows ABM. And so one of our corporate objectives last year was to recapture our leadership on ABM, right? That was our corporate objective. Now, we started to go down the path of writing yet another white paper, but we were documenting, okay, what are the things, how are we going to do this? And our concept was, okay, what are the things that people typically trip up with around ABM that cause it to fail? Or cause it to not quite produce what you think it's going to produce, right? And at that point is when I engaged with Chris and Fenwick and said, here's our goal. We want to recapture our thought leadership in ABM. We've identified these kind of 7 things that typically cause ABM to go wrong. Should we just write another white paper? And Chris said, hold my beer. Let us think on this a little bit and we'll come back to you. And so to his point about a spark test, he came back with a mood board after he did some spark testing on his own, right? And came back with a mood board and said, what do you think? Right. And thus was born Who Killed ABM. It wasn't just, here's a white paper of the 7 things people typically get wrong, but we turned it into saboteurs and intrigue and also fired people up because they're like, wait a second, ABM's not dead. We're like,
Yeah. There's a lot of
yeah,
kickback on that, which is exactly the kind of reaction you want,
right.
right? You need to
And we did.
dismantle the concept.
We had people who were like violently opposed, like, no, ABM's not dead. What are you talking about? And it was like, okay, stick with us. It was clear by the time we got to October, just kidding. ABM faked her death because everybody was doing it wrong. Right. And that
which
I
is
mean,
classic murder mystery, right? It's like the
yes.
show the show goes on no matter what.
Yep.
Part of what I think makes this work so well too is like credit goes to the Fenwick team that this is also just us having fun too, right? And asking what would entertain us and thinking about marketers.
Yes.
Ends up a lot of marketers we talk to are into murder mysteries. And Karina has read so much Agatha Christie that she can just stream of consciousness recreate some of the tropes from that. So this
Yep.
is both the same content, it is richly useful and
Yeah.
full of real examples and education wrapped in entertainment with these beautiful graphics by Clarissa and Amanda, with some mid-journey prompting to create recurring characters that carry throughout the series.
Yeah. And every chapter I read had me giggling inside, right? Like, and that was a good sign. I'm like, okay, if I'm laughing, like, if I get this, like, if I'm intrigued by this, so is our audience going to be.
Yeah. And credit to the whole Inverter team, people had questions about it and how are we gonna measure this and how's it gonna perform, but they let
Yep.
it out in the world and it got to do its thing.
Yep. Yep.
So, more creative concepts, I will talk about these very briefly. We had a campaign with this digital asset management company, not an exciting space necessarily, but we asked how can they, instead of running just a campaign about no features they've launched, which are very exciting, but almost too good to be true, what do we do? And so we created a campaign about the CMO who knows all, who is so all knowing that when she A/B tests, both variants win, and made it about memes and puns. And that has achieved more than it would have if they had just written a bunch of blog posts about what that new product does. With Eventique, they are an elite event production company. And instead of just publishing about what they do, we wanted to give people a feeling of it. And so we created this online masterclass for them. For Bessemer Venture Partners, they had an insight that all the founders that they were working with weren't just struggling with what idea to start with a startup, but they were struggling physically with starting a startup, right? These super long hours and not taking care of your body takes a toll and makes you less mentally acute and actually is a risk for your investors. So they created a physical exercise regimen and had us create an online course to pair with that teaches founders about nutrition and exercise and the importance of treating yourself like an endurance athlete. How does this come about? It's actually not that complicated if you have a creative team who knows how to run this, which is just a creative pitch process. So, like, here's the Eventique course. At the very beginning, we pitch 8 different ideas that this could be, and we give it to the client for them to react to, right? Because they know their business best. And so they will say, oh, yes, this, not really, that would work because of this. We had a creative on our team, Sarang, come up with this beautiful night school concept and then pulled it all through. These are simple stages. It does not require a lot of people approving this as they go. And by the time you have that initial pitch, you can do a spark test. And reactions from people were they would love this and they want to know when it's live.
Mm.
So, with that, we're now going to switch over into doing a workshop. To tie all of this back together, if I had to summarize it, I think blending in is a really serious marketing risk that a
Yeah.
lot of people do not realize because they are so focused on trying to get the campaign out there. And if I could encourage everyone to think about it this way, it's safety third, right? It's not safety first. We are not trying to be without risk. And I love this quote by Thomas Aquinas, which is the true aim of the captain were to preserve his ship. He would keep it in port forever. There is something about venturing out that leads to discovery. And Jessica, I don't know if you want to add anything onto that.
Yeah, I love this. I think, yes, once again, in a world of sameness, you need to stick out. You need to be different. Be the ugly duckling, if you will, right? Be the black swan, because those are the ones that get noticed, right? Be the dog with the wonk eye, whatever it is. Take some risks. If there you have a little bit of a pit in your stomach before you launch the campaign, that's probably good, right? Because it is different, and it's like, ooh, if it's a big pit, you should probably listen to it. But if you have a little pit in your stomach, it's probably good. And if you're excited to hit go, with a little bit of anxiety, it's also probably good because once again, there may be people who disagree, there may be people who agree, but it's going to start a conversation and it's going to get you noticed.
Yeah. And I love that you ended this right where we started, which is excitement. Marketers should be excited about their campaigns, and we want to help with that.